Fu Hao. In 1976, archaeologists working at Yinshu near the modern city of Anyang uncovered a rectangular burial pit outside the main royal cemetery of the Shang dynasty. Most royal tombs in the region had been emptied by looters centuries earlier. This one had remained sealed. Beneath layers of compacted earth lay a collapsed wooden chamber, surrounded by bronze weapons, ritual vessels, jade carvings, bone objects, ivory, and thousands of cowrie shells. Inscriptions on several objects identified the owner as Fu Hao, a royal consort who had lived around 1250 BCE. But the weapons revealed that she had been far more than a queen. Fu Hao was one of the consorts of King Wu Ding, ruler of one of the most powerful states in Bronze Age China. Oracle bone inscriptions from Wu Ding's reign describe Fu Hao participating in military campaigns, controlling an estate, and conducting important ceremonies for the royal ancestors. These were not later legends written centuries after her death. They were records produced during her lifetime, carved into cattle bones and turtle shells as the Shang court sought answers about warfare, harvests, childbirth, and royal decisions. The surviving inscriptions associate Fu Hao with expeditions against rival peoples beyond Shang territory. She appears not merely as a symbolic figure who blessed departing soldiers, but as a commander entrusted with troops and military responsibility. The exact size and structure of her forces remain debated because many oracle bone texts are fragmentary, yet the repeated references leave little doubt that Fu Hao occupied an exceptional position within the Shang military system. Her tomb strengthened that conclusion. Archaeologists recorded 468 bronze objects, including 130 weapons, alongside 755 jade objects, more than 500 carved bone objects, and approximately 6,900 cowrie shells. Among the weapons were heavy bronze axes that carried both practical and ceremonial meaning. In Shang society, such axes represented the authority to command, punish, and kill. Their presence in Fu Hao's burial was not decorative excess. They marked the status of someone who had exercised power in life. Fu Hao's authority extended beyond the battlefield. She presided over sacrifices and divination rituals through which the Shang court communicated with royal ancestors. Warfare and religion were inseparable. Before a campaign, questions could be carved into bone, heated until cracks appeared, and interpreted as ancestral guidance. A commander who also controlled ritual access did not merely lead soldiers. She stood between the living army and the supernatural order that was believed to determine victory. Yet, after her death, Fu Hao almost disappeared from conventional historical memory. No evidence proves that later rulers deliberately erased her. The disappearance was quieter than that. Shang records survived only in fragments. Wooden and textile documents decayed. Later, historical traditions focused on kings, dynastic succession, and male officials. Fu Hao's identity remained buried until archaeology placed her weapons beside the inscriptions bearing her name. That discovery changed the question surrounding women in ancient warfare. Fu Hao was not a fictional warrior added to a heroic legend. Her name, military role, and royal authority were preserved in objects made during the civilization she defended. The mystery lies in how completely that reality was forgotten. If one of the most powerful commanders of Bronze Age China could vanish from public memory for more than 3,000 years, how many other women once directed armies, decided campaigns, and terrified their enemies before history closed over them? Queen Samsi. Around 732 BCE, near Mount Sakri on the arid frontier between Syria and the Arabian interior, the army of Tiglath-Pileser III advanced against a ruler identified in Assyrian records as Samsi, Queen of the Arabs. The Neo-Assyrian Empire had already overwhelmed cities, removed kings, and transformed conquered lands into provinces. Its palace inscriptions presented resistance as something temporary, crushed beneath the king's weapons. Yet Samsi had broken an oath of loyalty and placed her forces directly in the path of that expanding empire. For Assyrian scribes, the campaign was important enough to carve into stone. The enemy they described was not the wife of a defeated ruler. She was the ruler. Almost everything known about Samsi comes from the empire that fought her. Assyrian inscriptions call her Sharat Arib, meaning Queen of the Arabs. The title was the feminine form of royal authority, not a ceremonial designation. Samsi controlled people, livestock, trade goods, and military forces across a landscape where survival depended on access to water, knowledge of desert routes, and the movement of camel caravans. Assyria could capture fortified cities with siege engines, but the desert presented a different battlefield. An army that moved too slowly could be defeated by distance before meeting an enemy. The surviving inscription offers no detailed account of Samsi's strategy. It simply announces that Tiglath-Pileser III defeated her at Mount Sakuri. Assyrian royal texts claim that 9,400 of her people were killed and another 1,000 were taken from her camp. They also list 30,000 camels, 20,000 cattle, thousands of containers of aromatics, divine objects, and military equipment among the spoils. These figures cannot be accepted without caution. Assyrian kings regularly used enormous numbers to magnify their victories and present their enemies as both powerful and completely destroyed. Even so, the scale of the inventory suggests that Samsi commanded resources of genuine political and economic importance. Palace reliefs associated with Tiglath-Pileser III show Assyrian cavalry attacking Arab fighters mounted on dromedary camels. A 19th-century drawing of another relief, now lost, appears to show a woman riding a camel during battle. Some researchers have proposed that the figure may represent Samsi, although the identification cannot be proven. What can be established is that she ruled the forces confronting Assyria. The inscriptions describe no male commander acting above her, and no husband directing the campaign in her name. After the defeat, Samsi escaped into the waterless desert. The Assyrian account compares her flight to that of a female wild donkey seeking survival in a place of thirst. Her camp was burned, her possessions seized, and her people placed under unbearable pressure. Eventually, she sent camels and other gifts to the Assyrian king and submitted. Yet, Tiglath-Pileser III did not remove her from power. Instead, an Assyrian representative and a force described as 10,000 soldiers were placed over her territory, while Samsi was allowed to continue ruling. Assyria had defeated her army, but replacing her may have been more dangerous than controlling her. Samsi later appeared again in records from the reign of Sargon II, indicating that her political importance survived the battle. Her authority, trade connections, and command of desert networks remained valuable enough for Assyria to preserve rather than destroy. But her story survives only in the language of her enemies. No Arabian chronicle records her reasons for rebelling. No statement from Samsi explains what she defended, what alliances she formed, or what price her people paid. Assyria preserved her name because defeating her glorified an Assyrian king. If an empire recorded Samsi only to celebrate her submission, then the most important part of her war may be precisely what the stone was designed to conceal. Artemisia I. In September 480 BCE, inside the narrow waters between the island of Salamis and the coast of Attica, hundreds of Persian warships pressed toward a smaller Greek fleet. King Xerxes watched from a throne placed above the shoreline, expecting to witness the destruction of the last major naval resistance to his invasion. Among the commanders sailing beneath Persian authority was Artemisia I, ruler of Halicarnassus. She had brought only 5 ships. Yet before the battle ended, both the Greeks pursuing her and the Persian king observing her would mistake what she had done. Artemisia ruled Halicarnassus and nearby territories along the southwestern coast of Asia Minor. After the death of her husband, she governed in her own right while her son was still young. Her lands were part of the Achaemenid Empire, and when Xerxes launched the invasion of Greece, Artemisia personally joined the campaign. According to Herodotus, she commanded the forces of Halicarnassus, Kos, Nizaros, and Kalindos, and her ships were considered among the finest in the Persian fleet after those of the Phoenicians from Sidon. Her greatest strength may not have been physical courage, but judgment. Before Salamis, Xerxes consulted his naval commanders about whether to attack the Greeks in the confined strait. Nearly every commander supported the battle. Artemisia alone advised against it. She argued that the Persian army already controlled Athens and that Xerxes had little to gain by risking his fleet. The Greek sailors were more experienced in narrow waters, while the Persian advantage depended on numbers and maneuvering space. Artemisia suggested holding the coastline or advancing toward the Peloponnese, forcing the divided Greek alliance to collapse without a decisive naval engagement. Xerxes praised her advice but rejected it. When the battle began, the narrow channel turned the size of the Persian fleet into a liability. Ships crowded together, oars collided, command signals became difficult to follow. Greek triremes attacked from organized positions, while Persian vessels struggled to deploy their superior numbers. Artemisia soon found her ship pursued by an Athenian vessel, with friendly ships blocking her route of escape. What happened next became the most controversial moment of her career. According to Herodotus, Artemisia ordered her ship to ram a vessel belonging to Kalindos, one of the forces fighting on the Persian side. The Kalindian ship sank with its crew and king aboard. The pursuing Athenian captain, seeing Artemisia attack what appeared to be a Persian vessel, concluded that her ship must belong to the Greeks, or had changed sides. He abandoned the pursuit. From his distant observation point, Xerxes also misunderstood the maneuver. Believing Artemisia had destroyed an enemy ship, he praised her performance while much of his fleet collapsed around her. Herodotus reports that none of the Kalindian crew survived to accuse Artemisia, leaving her actions unexplained and unpunished. Whether the collision was a deliberate sacrifice, a desperate escape, or confusion within a chaotic battle cannot be known. The surviving account was written by Herodotus, who came from Artemisia's own city, and openly admired her intelligence. No Persian record preserves her explanation. After the defeat, Artemisia again advised Xerxes to withdraw from Greece while leaving his general Mardonius to continue the land campaign. This time, the king followed the logic she had offered. Artemisia did not defeat the Greek fleet. She fought for the invading power and survived a disaster she had predicted. Yet she emerged from Salamis with her authority intact, while commanders with far larger forces disappeared into the wreckage. The question is not simply how a woman commanded ships in a world dominated by kings and admirals. The more unsettling question is why Artemisia understood the trap before almost every man around Xerxes, and what the Persian Empire might have preserved if its king had listened. Cynane. In 322 BCE, an armed column approached the frontier between Europe and Asia. At its center rode Cynane, daughter of King Philip II of Macedon, and half-sister of Alexander the Great. Alexander was dead, his empire had no uncontested ruler, and his generals were dividing authority among themselves. Cynane intended to cross into Asia and arrange the marriage of her daughter, Aedaea, to Philip III Aridaeus, one of the kings chosen to inherit Alexander's empire. The commanders governing in the king's name understood what that marriage could create. Cynane was not bringing her daughter to court, she was bringing a rival bloodline backed by soldiers. Cynane had been born into a royal family shaped by warfare. Her mother, Audata, was an Illyrian princess, and later tradition held that Cynane received military training associated with her mother's people. The Macedonian writer Polyaenos described Cynane as famous for military knowledge, commanding armies and charging at their head. Polyaenos also claimed that during a campaign against the Illyrians, Cynane personally defeated an Illyrian queen in combat. The episode was recorded centuries after Cynane's lifetime, so its dramatic details cannot be verified. Yet even a late source would have gained little by inventing a reputation that its readers did not recognize. Her father had already transformed Macedonia into the strongest military state in Greece. Cynane therefore grew up near cavalry drills, weapons training, royal marriages, and campaigns in which political survival depended on physical force. She later married Amyntas, a Macedonian prince whose claim to the throne made him dangerous. After Alexander became king, Amyntas was executed. Cynane survived, but her position remained precarious. Rather than withdraw completely into royal domestic life, she gave her daughter a military education and taught Aedaea the skills expected of a commander. When Alexander died in Babylon in 323 BCE, there was no adult heir capable of controlling the empire. His half-brother, Philip III, had been proclaimed king alongside Alexander's infant son, but real power belonged to generals such as Perdiccas. Cynane recognized that Philip III's marriage could determine who controlled the Macedonian royal house. By uniting Philip III with Aedaea, Cynane could place her daughter beside the king and gain influence over the army that still revered the family of Philip and Alexander. Antipater, the leading Macedonian authority in Europe, reportedly attempted to prevent Cynane from leaving. She continued eastward with her own force, crossed into Asia, and advanced toward the royal army. Perdiccas sent his brother Alcetus to stop her. Polyaenus states that when the Macedonian soldiers saw Philip's daughter and Alexander's sister standing before them, they hesitated. Cynane confronted Alcetus despite the size of his force and refused to surrender her claim to royal status. Alcetus killed her. The act solved nothing. The Macedonian soldiers reacted with outrage at the death of a daughter of Philip II. Their anger became so dangerous that Perdiccas was forced to allow the marriage Cynane had demanded. Aedia married Philip III, adopted the royal name Eurydice, and soon emerged as an active political figure in the wars among Alexander's successors. Cynane did not survive to rule through her daughter. She did not conquer an empire or defeat the commanders who opposed her. Yet her presence alone disrupted their plans. They possessed Alexander's armies, treasury, and provinces, but Cynane carried something they could not manufacture: the blood of the dynasty those soldiers believed they were still serving. Her death reveals how seriously the successors regarded her. Cynane was not eliminated because she lacked power. She was eliminated because one marriage, one army, and one surviving daughter could have placed the empire beyond their control. And even after they killed her, they were still forced to obey her final strategy. Amanirenas. Around 24 BCE, Roman garrisons along the southern frontier of Egypt were suddenly attacked by an army advancing north from the kingdom of Kush. The Kushite forces struck Cynane, modern Aswan, along with the strategic islands of Elephantine and Philae. Roman statues were torn down, prisoners were taken, and symbols of Emperor Augustus were carried south as trophies. Rome had conquered Egypt only 6 years earlier. Now, while Augustus was transforming the Mediterranean into a Roman world, a ruler from beyond the First Cataract had opened a new war against him. Her name was Amanirenas. Amanirenas held the title Kandake, a royal term associated with powerful women of the Meroitic kingdom. Roman writers treated female military authority as something unusual, but within Kush, royal women could hold political, ceremonial, and military power. Amanirenas appears to have assumed greater authority following the death of King Terytechus, at a moment when Roman expansion threatened the trade routes, agricultural lands, and sacred sites of Lower Nubia. The surviving written account comes mainly from Strabo, a Greek geographer writing within the Roman world. Strabo described the Kandake as a formidable woman who had lost the sight of one eye. He also claimed that the Kushite army numbered about 30,000 soldiers. Those details must be treated cautiously. Roman accounts were written to celebrate imperial victories, and the Meroitic records that might preserve the Kushite perspective remain only partly understood. What is clear is that the attack forced Rome to respond. Gaius Petronius, the prefect of Egypt, marched south with infantry and cavalry. Roman forces defeated the Kushites in battle, retook the occupied settlements, and captured the fortress at Primus, now known as Qasr Ibrim. Petronius then claimed to have advanced as far as Napata, where Roman troops destroyed part of the city before withdrawing north. Some modern scholars question whether every stage of this campaign occurred exactly as Roman sources describe, particularly the speed and distance of the march through severe desert conditions. Amanirenas did not disappear after the Roman counterattack. Kushite forces continued resisting the Roman position at Primus, turning what imperial propaganda presented as a swift punishment into a prolonged frontier conflict. Rome had taken cities, but Rome had not reduced Kush to a province. One object preserves the psychological dimension of the war. Archaeologists at Meroe discovered a bronze head of Augustus beneath the steps of a temple associated with victory. The head had been removed from a Roman statue during the Kushite raids and deliberately buried where worshippers would walk above it. Its glass and stone eyes remained open, forcing the emperor's image to stare upward while the people of Kush stepped over his face. By approximately 20 BCE, Kushite representatives met Augustus on the island of Samos. The resulting settlement established a frontier and ended the war. Rome retained a northern border district, while Kush remained independent farther south. The agreement also appears to have removed or reduced financial demands placed on the Meroitic kingdom, and the frontier entered a long period of relative stability. Roman writers could describe Petronius as victorious. Yet Rome did not annex the Kushite heartland, depose Amanirenas, or turn Meroe into another conquered capital. The Candaques had faced the army of Augustus, survived its retaliation, and negotiated without surrendering her kingdom. The most revealing monument to that resistance was not a triumphal arch in Rome. It was the emperor's severed bronze face, buried beneath an African temple, condemned to watch a kingdom he had failed to break. Queen Mavia, in 378 CE, while Emperor Valens prepared the Eastern Roman army for a catastrophic confrontation with the Goths, reports of another crisis began arriving from the desert frontier. Settlements across Arabia, Palestine, and Phoenicia were being attacked by fast-moving Arab forces commanded by a woman whom Roman writers called Mavia. Imperial troops were sent to contain the rebellion, but the campaign did not end with Mavia captured or her confederation destroyed. Instead, Roman commanders were pushed back, negotiations were opened, and the emperor was forced to accept a condition imposed by the queen he had attempted to suppress. Mavia ruled a group commonly associated with the Tanukids, a confederation of Arab communities that had long operated along Rome's eastern frontier. These groups were not simply outsiders raiding imperial territory. Some had served as Roman allies, guarded desert routes, and supplied mounted fighters when the empire required them. Their relationship with Rome depended on treaties, subsidies, and personal agreements with tribal leaders. After Mavia's husband died, the political arrangement appears to have broken down. Later, Christian historians claimed that the dispute centered on religion. According to their version, Mavia demanded that a desert holy man named Moses be appointed bishop over her people. Emperor Valens supported a form of Christianity rejected by Moses and by many Christians in the eastern provinces. Yet modern historians have questioned whether religion alone caused the war. The death of Mavia's husband may also have ended an existing treaty, giving Rome and the Arab Confederation sharply different expectations about what should follow. Whatever triggered the revolt, the military response was real. Ancient accounts describe Mavia's forces moving through the frontier provinces and defeating Roman units in repeated engagements. The desert gave her army advantages that conventional imperial forces struggled to overcome. Mounted fighters could appear beyond fortified roads, strike settlements or isolated detachments, and withdraw before heavily equipped troops organized a response. Rome controlled cities and military posts. Mavia's forces controlled the distances between them. One account describes a senior Roman commander entering the campaign with confidence, only to be surrounded and nearly destroyed. A regional officer whom he had previously dismissed was forced to intervene and rescue the remains of the Roman force. The story may have been shaped to humiliate imperial arrogance, but its conclusion is difficult to ignore. Rome could not end the revolt through battlefield pressure alone. Peace followed on Mavia's terms. Moses was to be consecrated as bishop for her people. When the imperial bishop Lucius attempted to perform the ceremony, Moses reportedly refused because of their theological differences. The ordination was completed by exiled bishops accepted by Mavia's community. What began as a frontier war therefore ended with the Roman government recognizing both the queen's military leverage and her authority over the religious life of her people. The alliance was restored quickly enough that Arab cavalry associated with Mavia later appeared in the defense of Constantinople after the Roman disaster at Adrianople. The same fighters who had recently driven imperial soldiers across the eastern provinces were now protecting the capital from another enemy. Yet Mavia's military career was gradually compressed into a religious anecdote. Roman and Christian writers remembered the bishop she demanded more clearly than the political system she commanded. Her motives were reduced to doctrine, her territory was left undefined, and even the size of her confederation remains uncertain. Rome did not erase Mavia's name. It preserved only the portion of her victory that could be transformed into a lesson about the church. But behind that lesson remains a more dangerous truth. At the moment when the Roman Empire faced disaster on its northern frontier, an Arab queen had already demonstrated that its eastern armies could be defeated, its commanders humiliated, and its emperor brought to negotiation. Lady Trieu, in 248 CE, rebellion erupted across Cu Chan, a southern commandery of the Eastern Wu Empire, in what is now Thanh Hoa Province, Vietnam. Government strongholds were attacked, local officials lost control, and resistance spread toward neighboring Jiao Qi. At the center of Vietnamese memory stands a young woman known as Trieu Thi Trinh, or Lady Trieu. She was barely in her 20s when she gathered fighters in the mountains and entered a war against an empire that controlled armies, fortified cities, and the administrative machinery of southern China. Later, Vietnamese accounts connect Lady Trieu with her elder brother, Treo Quoc Dat. Together, they are said to have assembled supporters in Su Chan after years of exploitation and increasingly harsh rule by Wu officials. When her brother died during the uprising, Lady Trieu reportedly assumed greater command. From mountain bases around the Nua region, the rebels attacked local centers of authority and transformed a regional disturbance into a challenge that could no longer be ignored. The military details are difficult to reconstruct. Vietnamese tradition describes Lady Trieu wearing a yellow robe and riding an elephant into battle. It also preserves a defiant speech in which she refuses a submissive domestic life and declares her desire to ride the winds, cross dangerous waves, and drive out oppressors. These images became inseparable from her identity, but they were recorded long after the events. They reveal how Lady Trieu was remembered, not necessarily how every moment of the campaign occurred. The surviving Eastern Wu record tells a colder story. The official history of the Three Kingdoms confirms that major rebellions broke out in Jiaoqi and Kuchan in 248. Cities were attacked, the region was thrown into disorder, and the Wu court sent Liu Yin to restore control. Yet the record does not name Lady Trieu. It focuses instead on Liu Yin, praising his combination of military force, negotiation, and payments to local leaders. The text claims that more than 100 rebel chiefs and tens of thousands of households eventually submitted. This absence is one of the most revealing parts of the story. The Imperial Archive acknowledged the rebellion, but removed the woman who became its most enduring symbol. To Eastern Wu historians, the conflict was another frontier disturbance successfully pacified by an imperial official. To Vietnamese communities, it became the story of a young commander who resisted domination even when victory was almost impossible. Traditional accounts state that Lady Trieu's forces resisted for approximately 5 or 6 months. Wu pressure gradually weakened the rebellion through battle, isolation, and the surrender of regional leaders. Lady Trieu was ultimately defeated near the mountains of Than Hoa and died in 248. The precise circumstances remain uncertain. Later tradition places her final stand near Tung Mountain, where temples and memorial practices preserved her presence long after the political details faded. Lady Trieu did not overthrow Eastern Wu. She did not establish an independent kingdom or leave inscriptions written in her own voice. Her enemy controlled the official records, and those records barely allowed her to exist. But imperial silence failed where armies succeeded. For more than 17 centuries, her name survived in temples, festivals, local histories, and oral tradition. The empire recorded the suppression of a rebellion. The people remembered the woman who made that suppression necessary. And perhaps that is why Lady Trieu remained dangerous long after her army was gone. Eastern Wu could defeat her on the battlefield, but it could not control who future generations chose to remember. Boudica. In 60 or 61 CE, while the Roman governor Gaius Suetonius Paulinus was campaigning far to the west on the island of Mona, rebellion exploded in eastern Britain. The first target was Camulodunum, a Roman colony built on land once controlled by the Trinovantes. The settlement had few defenses, no complete wall, and a temple dedicated to the Emperor Claudius that local people had been forced to support. Thousands of rebels surrounded the colony. At their head stood Boudica, ruler of the Iceni, a woman whom Rome had publicly humiliated and expected never to threaten it again. The crisis began after the death of Boudica's husband, Prasutagus. He had ruled the Iceni as a client king under Roman authority and reportedly named both Emperor Nero and his own daughters as heirs. The arrangement may have been intended to protect his family and preserve part of the kingdom. Rome ignored it. The territory was treated as conquered land. Property was seized, and members of the Iceni elite were stripped of their status. According to Tacitus, Boudica was flogged and her daughters were sexually assaulted. Tacitus wrote decades later and shaped the episode as a warning about Roman corruption, but his account preserves the brutality that transformed local resentment into open war. The Iceni were soon joined by the Trinovantes and other communities with grievances against Roman officials, settlers, and financiers. Their first assault overwhelmed Camulodunum. The defenders retreated into the temple of Claudius, where they resisted for 2 days before the building fell. A detachment of the 9th Legion marched to relieve the colony, but the rebels destroyed most of its infantry. Only the Roman cavalry commander and part of his mounted force escaped. Boudica's army then moved toward Londinium. Suetonius reached the growing commercial settlement before the rebels, but the Roman governor lacked enough soldiers to defend it. Londinium was abandoned despite the pleas of residents who could not or would not leave. The rebels entered the undefended town and burned it. Verulamium was attacked next. Archaeological layers of ash and scorched material beneath the later Roman cities confirmed destruction on a scale that official language could not conceal. Tacitus claimed that approximately 70,000 Roman citizens and allied Britons died during the attacks. Ancient casualty figures were often exaggerated, and the real number cannot be established. What mattered was the effect. 3 important settlements had been destroyed, a legionary force had been broken, and Roman authority across the province appeared close to collapse. Suetonius eventually assembled a smaller but disciplined army for a decisive battle at an unidentified location. The Roman commander positioned his troops where forests protected the rear, and narrow ground prevented the rebels from using their full numbers. Roman javelins shattered the first advance. Legionaries then moved forward in tight formations, while cavalry attacked from the sides. The rebel army became trapped against the wagons, carrying its families and supplies. The uprising ended in slaughter. Boudica's fate remains uncertain. Tacitus wrote that she took poison. Cassius Dio claimed that she became ill and died. No confirmed grave has been found, and no words written by Boudica herself survive. Rome won the battle and controlled every official account that followed. Yet beneath modern London, Colchester and St. Albans remain traces of the fires her army left behind. Boudica failed to remove Rome from Britain, but for one season, she forced the most powerful empire in the Western world to confront the possibility that an entire province could be lost to a woman it had attempted to break. Zenobia. In the summer of 272 CE, Roman troops intercepted a royal fugitive near the Euphrates River. The prisoner was Zenobia, queen of Palmyra, who had attempted to escape a besieged capital and reach Persian territory. Only months earlier, Zenobia had controlled Syria, Egypt, and large parts of Asia Minor. Her authority extended across some of the richest provinces in the Roman East. Now, Emperor Aurelian was advancing toward Palmyra, determined to destroy the rival empire that had formed while Rome was fighting for survival. Zenobia had risen to power after the death of her husband, Odaenathus, the ruler who had defended Rome's eastern provinces against the Sasanian Empire. Their young son, Vaballathus, inherited his father's position, but Zenobia became the true authority behind the Palmyrene court. At first, she continued to present Palmyra as a loyal partner of Rome. Roman titles remained in use, imperial institutions continued functioning, and coins acknowledged the authority of the Roman emperor, but the Roman Empire was trapped in the crisis of the 3rd century. Emperors were overthrown, frontiers collapsed, and a separate Gallic empire controlled much of the West. Zenobia recognized that Rome could no longer guarantee the security of the East. Palmyra possessed wealth, experienced cavalry, desert trade routes, and an army hardened by campaigns against Persia. Around 269 or 270 CE, Zenobia sent forces under the general Zabdas into Egypt. The invasion seized Alexandria and brought the grain-producing province under Palmyrene control. Egypt was not simply another conquest. The grain shipped from the Nile helped feed Roman cities, while Alexandria connected Mediterranean commerce with the Red Sea. By controlling Egypt, Zenobia gained both economic power and leverage over Rome. Palmyrene armies also advanced through Syria and much of Asia Minor. Zenobia established a Roman-style administration across the conquered territories and elevated Vaballathus from regional prince to emperor. Her own titles became increasingly independent. Coins eventually presented Zenobia as Augusta and Vaballathus as Augustus. What had begun as emergency rule on Rome's frontier had become an imperial challenge. In 272 CE, Aurelian marched east. Several cities surrendered as the Roman emperor advanced through Asia Minor. Zenobia's forces confronted the Romans near Antioch at the Battle of Imme. Palmyrene heavy cavalry initially pressed the attack, but Roman horsemen withdrew deliberately, drawing their opponents into a prolonged pursuit. When the heavily armored Palmyrene riders became exhausted, the Romans turned and attacked. a second major defeat followed near Emesa. Zenobia retreated behind the walls of Palmyra, where Aurelian began a siege. The desert city had survived invasions and economic crises, but it could not endure indefinitely without outside support. Zenobia attempted to reach the Sasanian Empire, perhaps hoping to secure soldiers or sanctuary. She was captured before completing the journey. Palmyra surrendered soon afterward. Ancient accounts disagree about what happened next. The famous image of Zenobia being displayed in Aurelian's triumph while bound in golden chains may be partly legendary. Some traditions claim that she was executed. Others state that Aurelian spared her and gave her an estate near Rome, where she lived as a wealthy noblewoman. No surviving account written by Zenobia explains her decisions, ambitions, or final fate. Rome described her as a rebel who had seized imperial territory during a moment of weakness. Yet, Zenobia had created a functioning state that governed cities, commanded armies, and controlled trade across 3 continents. She was defeated only after one of Rome's most capable military emperors personally marched east to stop her. Zenobia did not merely frighten Rome with rebellion. She forced Rome to prove that it was still an empire. Tomyris, around 530 BCE, somewhere beyond the eastern frontier of the Achaemenid Empire, Cyrus the Great entered the open country of the Massagetæ. By then, Cyrus had defeated the Medes, conquered Lydia, captured Babylon, and created the largest empire the ancient Near East had yet seen. Kingdoms that resisted him had collapsed. Rulers who underestimated him had lost their thrones. Yet, across the river, traditionally identified as the Araxes, stood Tomyris, the widowed queen of a steppe people whom Persia had not yet subdued. Cyrus expected another conquest. Instead, the campaign became the last war of his life. The principal account comes from the Greek historian Herodotus, writing decades after the events. Herodotus states that Cyrus first attempted to marry Tomyris, but the queen recognized that the proposal was aimed at acquiring her kingdom rather than securing a wife. She rejected him. Cyrus then prepared a bridge and floating towers to carry his army across the river. Tomyris sent a warning. He could remain within his own territory, or she would withdraw 3 days into Massagetæ land and allow him space to cross. Cyrus chose invasion. The Massagetæ were mobile pastoralists accustomed to fighting across enormous stretches of grassland. Herodotus described them as warriors who fought both on horseback and on foot, using bows, spears, and battle axes. Their equipment was associated with bronze and gold rather than iron. Cyrus commanded disciplined infantry, cavalry, and troops drawn from conquered nations. But the Persian army was moving through terrain where the Massagetæ controlled water, distance, and movement. According to Herodotus, Cyrus accepted a plan proposed by Croesus, the former king of Lydia. The Persians prepared a camp filled with food and undiluted wine, then withdrew while leaving behind a vulnerable detachment. A Massagetæ force led by Tomyris' son, Spargapises, attacked the camp and killed its defenders. Believing they had won, the warriors consumed the unfamiliar wine and fell asleep. The Persian army returned, killing many and capturing the rest. Spargapises awakened in captivity and asked Cyrus to remove his restraints. Once released from the chains, he took his own life. Tomyris responded with a message that transformed the campaign from territorial defense into personal vengeance. She accused Cyrus of defeating her son through wine rather than courage. She demanded that he leave her land and warned that if he remained, she would give him his fill of blood. Cyrus ignored her. The decisive battle followed. Herodotus called it one of the fiercest conflicts ever fought between non-Greek peoples. Both armies first exchanged arrows at distance, then closed with spears and blades. The fighting continued for an extended period without either side withdrawing. Eventually, the Massagetæ broke the Persian formation. Most of Cyrus's army was reportedly destroyed, and Cyrus himself was killed. After the battle, Tomyris searched among the dead until Cyrus's body was found. Herodotus claims that she severed his head and placed it inside a container filled with human blood, declaring that she had fulfilled her warning. The image became one of antiquity's most enduring scenes of revenge. But even this ending remains uncertain. Other ancient traditions place Cyrus's death in a different campaign, or describe him dying peacefully. No surviving Massagetæ account confirms Tomyris' version, and Persian royal inscriptions do not explain how their empire's founder died. Modern historians therefore cannot determine which narrative preserves the truth. What remains is the reversal no empire could easily absorb. Cyrus entered the steppe as a ruler who had never encountered a permanent limit. Tomyris forced history to remember that limit as a woman. The Persian Empire survived and expanded after Cyrus. The kingdom of Tomyris left no comparable archive, yet the conqueror's final battlefield is remembered through the name of the queen he failed to conquer. And perhaps that was Tomyris's most complete victory. Cyrus built an empire intended to outlive him, but the story of his death belonged to his enemy. Conclusion. These 10 women reveal a disturbing pattern in the way ancient power was recorded. Fu Hao commanded armies, yet her military identity remained buried until archaeologists opened her tomb. Samsi survived only in inscriptions celebrating the king who defeated her. Artemisia was remembered through a Greek historian fascinated by the woman who advised Persia more wisely than its admirals. Lady Trieu disappeared from the official account of the rebellion that made her a legend. This was not always a deliberate conspiracy to erase women from history. The process was often quieter and more effective. Empires preserved the victories of emperors. Court historians followed male dynasties. Military records praised the generals who restored order, while the women who forced those campaigns were reduced to rebels, widows, religious curiosities, or cautionary tales. Yet their enemies reveal how powerful they truly were. Rome sent armies against Amanirenas, Mavia, Boudica, and Zenobia. Alexander's successors killed Cynane because her bloodline could overturn their control of the empire. Cyrus the Great crossed into the territory of Tomyris and never returned. These women were not minor figures standing beside history. They were the reason armies moved, governors panicked, cities burned, and emperors negotiated. The greatest loss is not simply that some names were forgotten. It is that generations were taught to imagine ancient warfare, leadership, and political ambition as almost entirely male. Every buried weapon, hostile inscription, and surviving legend suggests that the real past was more complicated. The question is not whether women once held military power. The evidence shows that some clearly did. The question is how many others terrified their enemies, changed the direction of empires, and then vanished because history preserved the men who survived them.